Hi, welcome back to SPE Live and today's show, Drilling the Reservoir. It's great to see you all, so thank you for joining us today. My name is Nils Kaageson-Loe. It's my great pleasure to be your host today. So if you're new to SPE Live, check us out on social media, hashtag SPE Live, or find us on the website, spe.org. SPE Live is in part made possible by sponsorship from the SPE Foundation, so thank you to our sponsor. Today is the second in our SPE Live Directors series, and like last week, we'll be talking to two of SPE's technical directors. This time, the technical directors for the drilling and reservoir engineering disciplines within SPE's organization. So these guys are the ones that are in charge for laying down the strategy and direction for reservoir and drilling technical subjects, topics, and the whole discipline within the SPE. So within the SPE and for its members, and for the benefits of its members. So starting with drilling the reservoir, David Reid and Professor Erdal Ozkan will be talking about their SPE disciplines in context of the current status of conventional and unconventional reservoirs, so the status of the business at the moment. Some important economic drivers around that. We'll be visiting those. We're looking at a very special subject, back to fundamentals and education. So what are the current trends in petroleum engineering in particular? And then if we have time, we'll be talking about the energy transition. So this, dear audience, is your opportunity to ask questions of our technical directors. So please engage with us, ask questions of these experts. I mean, both David and Erdal are expert in their subjects. So if you have questions about the current situation, the future of reservoir engineering or drilling engineering or petroleum engineering, now is your opportunity. So interact with us through the chat boxes on social media. If you want, repost us, please, and tag us on social media to people who may be interested in today's live stream. So let us meet our guests today. First of all, we have David Reid and Erdal Ozkan, both our technical directors. And so let's say a little bit about David Reid. He is the SPE Technical Director for Drilling. He's also the CTO and CMO at NOV, so National Oil Varco. He is skilled at motivating large groups, technology, strategy, market development, new business models, and leadership. A growth catalyst for business, products, teams, and people and culture, very well recognized within the industry. He has unique business leadership with a proven record of eliminating large corporate inefficiencies and building effective dynamic communities and driving technology innovation. David very neatly summarizes his career path as, "My goals have kept me driving towards roles that are pioneering and fun for myself and the people I take with me." So very, very powerful message there from David. Currently, he's also on the NOV Schlumberger Joint Venture IntelliServe Board and the Redeemed Ministries Board. In addition to being a lifelong support and member of SPE, his previous roles have also included IADC Executive Committee as VP of Services Division and founder and chairman of the IADC Advanced Rig Technology Committee. Joining David is Professor Erdal Ozkan. He is the SPE Technical Director for Reservoir Discipline, essentially all things reservoir engineering. 22 years as professor in petroleum engineering at Colorado School of Mines, including teaching and research experience at Istanbul Technical University and the University of Tulsa. In total, over 30 years in leading academic institutes. He is a world-renowned expert in reservoir engineering. His main research interests are horizontal and multilateral well technology, pressure transient analysis, modeling, fluid flow in porous media, and unconventional reservoirs. All technical subjects very near and dear to my own heart, in fact. He is currently Director of Unconventional Reservoir Engineering Project, UREP. It's a research consortium with multiple industry partners at Colorado. And in addition, again, to his lifelong support of SPE, he's also a member of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, ASME, and the Mathematical Association of America. So gentlemen, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Nils.
Hi.
Hi. So, as I said at the beginning, we're looking at the status of the future of drilling engineering and reservoir engineering within our industry. Hopefully, we can touch upon sort of current status of conventional and unconventional reservoirs, some of the important economic drivers, back to fundamentals, and why SPE. So, what is the role of SPE within all of this? So, just a quick mention to our audience, please share your thoughts on reservoir engineering and drilling engineering. Now's your chance to ask David and Erdal plenty of really good questions. We'll be looking at your chat and bringing your questions into the studio as we go. So, David, Erdal, let's begin with a quick look at the status of the industry. Erdal, what is the status? What are your thoughts and feelings around conventional and unconventional reservoirs currently?
This is an interesting question for everyone because unconventional by definition is an interesting word. Unconventional is something we are not familiar with. Now, that's how it has started. But what is unconventional, what was unconventional about 20 years ago has become conventional today, and there will be new conventionals, hopefully, in the decades coming up. So from that perspective, I think our success lies in our ability to convert unconventional into new conventional and proceed with it, which is basically the definition of innovation. Because innovation is useless unless we convert it to a utility in the near future and then proceed to the next one. So probably we have reached a point where we can say that what was named unconventional recently, it has been the new conventional. And with that one, I'm not ignoring the fact that we have, in the old definition, standard conventional reservoirs. They are still important. Their contribution is huge, but unconventional, so to speak, they had been on the front stage because of their impact on the market and in our lives and in our learning, technical evolutions and things like this. So I think at this point, I say that we are at the crossroads of unconventional and conventional. It is time to combine our knowledge from both ends and look for the new frontiers.
Excellent, Erdal. Thank you. I'm going to come back to some of those comments in a minute where you were talking about the unconventional and the now becoming conventional and the innovation useless unless it has some utility. David, can you sort of give us some opening remarks about what you see as the status of the industry?
Well, we all know that we're struggling across all fronts, but what's interesting is what we've been able to do in unconventional and the type of work that's gone on because of mass production of repeat wells. So the efficiency side of what we've been able to do has been fascinating, but of course that is shrinking, although I don't believe it's going away because of it's really more an economics question. The agility of any basin to deliver cash fast is going to be something people are going to rely on. So it'll still be there. And some of those learnings still have to get carried off into the conventional when it comes to technology and applications. There was definitely a lot learned from putting all the power at the well site. A lot happened where you allowed people to make changes, become more agile. In a lot of ways, like Silicon Valley, we saw a lot of youth, surprisingly, inside of our unconventional plays. And a lot of things happened very fast. At the same time, when we look at conventional, they've continued on doing what they're doing, but we're going to start to see people spread. We're going to start to see a move of knowledge between the two. And some of that's going to be good, and some of it's actually going to be a challenge for us because the way we've approached unconventional wells when we drill them, often, for the most part, a lot of people looked at it as let's just put in as many wells as fast as we can, which, as we know from a conventional application, can actually be really bad because where placement is a lot more important to the total drainage of the reservoir into Erdal's world. And that really opens up probably the trend that's most interesting and important for us right now is the connection between our two disciplines. And it's not just our connection, but it's probably the holistic view of how wells perform and when we drill them, what is good and bad. And so for an unconventional behavior has been what is good is speed, because we're looking at just cost of operations. And in reality, sometimes that was true, and sometimes other people, it's a good argument of placement and paying a bit more money on and looking at technology to improve your placement can have high value. So there's an argument inside of there, but when you get to conventional, that becomes critical, and so there's so much to win and lose. So from a technology standpoint, I think it's going to be an interesting next run for us, particularly in how we mix the technologies, how we mix expertise, manage some of our risk between the two, as well as start looking at our data sets and how they can actually help us perform better than we ever did before. So unconventionals definitely delivered us new efficiencies that we could use everywhere, and kind of carries some risk as well as we look into conventional applications as we start to cross-breed both of those disciplines.
Thanks, David. So Erdal, did you want to chip in there? Please.
I wanted to probably touch on an interesting aspect of this SPE Live session. People might be thinking about why drilling and reservoir. Usually there are a lot of concerns about drilling and reservoir engineers or specialists being on the different sides of the aisle. But in unconventional, I will be a little bit controversial to say that drilling has done a lot of reservoir science and engineering lately. And to open up this statement a little bit more, in my opinion, drilling is much more than just putting a hole in the ground to reach the resource. Because as reservoir scientists and engineers, drilling is the only way we can get in touch with our subject, which is the reservoir. So we collect the data, we collect information, we get to know the reservoir through drilling. But there is a limit to it. And the limit is that you cannot learn everything through drilling because it's an awfully expensive way of doing it. So you drill a few wells, and then you use some modeling, you use some reservoir tools to connect the dots and build a model, and you improve the model as you go. But with the high oil price in the beginning of unconventional technologies, instead of doing more modeling and understanding, we went direct into drilling, and we got to know the reservoir through drilling, and that was a little bit trial and error in the process. But this put reservoir a little bit behind the process because it was a longer process, it was time consuming, it was a little bit more expensive. And then today we have reached the point that we are drilling wells as cheap as possible, and it's hard to go any lower than that these days. And we still have questions about these reservoirs. We don't know them enough. So this is the point where we need to optimize the number of wells we drill and good reservoir science and engineering to get to know these resources. So that's why drilling and reservoir comes so close in that sense, and we are with David today on this show.
Oh, thanks, Erdal.
Yeah, I would say that the challenge for us next is the timing loop between data sets, right, and how fast we can compute and calculate. I think that's where I think all the folks in drilling. One thing I learned just growing in the industry was that there was a tendency to believe that we all have our thing that we do, and the silos are the best way to execute. And so everyone kind of has their opinion about each other. disparaging in most cases, but not true, right? So no one is really trying to do a bad job. We're just very different and deep in our technical disciplines, and so learning how to bridge that, and actually, I know from my own work experience that breaking down silos is a critical benefit to efficiency and improvement. And I think that's really what's coming next, is the don't waste a good downturn saying is something that we really need to make sure that this crisis isn't something that we miss, that there's opportunity to actually connect up data sets and start really looking at, when I drill a well, can we actually do better modeling while drilling? And I think that's an area that we connect on and have a lot more work to do.
Thanks, David. I'm going to come back to what you and Erdal have been talking about in terms of the linkage between drilling and reservoir and conventionalizing unconventionals. First of all, I just want to pick up some audience questions. So to you, David, first of all, Rabin Ishmael on LinkedIn was asking, do you think is a better choice between underbalanced drilling or conventional drilling in the future?
Well, if you ask anyone who's in the underbalanced group, the answer is everyone should be underbalanced. So I know from that Kool-Aid crowd where they're and they have good points. The benefits of underbalanced. I really like where we've gone lately in the automated approach to underbalanced, because it hits one of the other cost challenges that is across all of the applications. Whereas if you can imagine a world where people don't have to be at the rig site, it's going to be better. So I think that's actually quite a big step as the world is automating. It allows it to become more of a conventional solution. And I think a lot of people having underbalanced options available and using underbalanced definitely is becoming more than just a niche part of our business. I think it will continue to grow. I think it gives us a lot of options going forward, a lot more control and information. And it's generally just a safer way to drill, but there's cost associated. So that integration and reduction of cost becomes important. But yeah, I think we're going to continue to see growth in the underbalance, particularly in offshore, where it's not been as simple to execute. And so we're really starting to push into those areas. And as people, that's another place where automation has been working very well. So we've seen some closed loop automated systems. And the more that happens and people see that it's possible to take a lot of cost out and still deliver that value, that we're going to see more of it. I think it's a trend since probably early. I think I started being involved in that around 96, 97. And then we were just managed pressure drilling, and underbalance became became more about managing pressure. And so as that became a move, I think everyone's very comfortable with managed pressure, and I think we'll see a swing. We'll see a swing to more interest in the underbalanced application.
All right, thank you. So picking up from that, David, and Erdal, your earlier mentions of silos and breaking down silos. I think, David, you also mentioned this. Erdal, what's your opinion on underbalanced drilling? Because, I mean, it's a way of accumulating a lot of reservoir data, right, as you're drilling, right?
Well, I guess from reservoir side, we like underbalanced drilling because at least in our family circle, so to speak, we like to pick on our drilling engineer friends, saying that they mess up our reservoirs by creating this huge problem of skin damage and near wellbore problems. So from that perspective, of course, we are keen on all these developments in underbalanced drilling. But pressure is something we rely on for production, and we also understand that in drilling the well, pressure is something we can control the formation. We can be more cognizant about well stability issues and long-term problems. So I think there should be some balance, and I can definitely understand why David was saying that this automation, use of data, online or on-time evaluations of the conditions would really help finding the best operational balance between the two. So this is the comment from a reservoir engineer on
Yeah.
on the balance drilling.
Yeah, well, of course, the hard thing is anyone who manages the well fears it because it's the opposite of everything you were trained to do. So letting something flow is not natural, and so there's a natural concern. But like I said, I think a lot of years of living with managed pressure has helped people start to probably open up that idea and think of it more as a possibility. So we'll see. But certainly there's some cost and some risk to manage and all of that. I like the more data we can get from in the well during operations instead of being blind, the more I think people will be open.
Yeah, to your point, David, I think there's a lot of promise in how much data you can collect from underbalanced drilling, particularly as you're in the reservoir, because you get a lot of flow information from the different reservoir segments. But there's always that concern about well control assurance, right?
Yeah.
Erdal, yes, you were going to sort of...
Yeah, there is probably one thing which is both a comment and question to David too, but no, we know that damaging a reservoir is much easier than repairing afterwards.
Yeah.
So this is a fact. And dealing with the tidal formations recently, I think if you just look at the formation damage as a penetration problem of these drilling fluids and everything into the formation, it's going to be hard to get into tight non-porous formations and everything. But how about cleaning this whole thing once the damage is done? I think it's equally harder. And I would say that sometimes people ignore the fact that we create some damage in unconventionals, but I think getting rid of this damage after it's done, it's even harder in unconventional. So we should always keep that in mind, and that's why we are getting this new drilling technologies more and more.
When I think the gap between reservoir needs and drilling needs, which are the same needs ultimately because we all serve the same master, but that gap has to be filled. I mean, the things that we do in drilling, we don't want to hear from the completions guys or from the reservoir guys when we're in the middle of getting our job done. And in reality, that has to be a much better communication system. We have to look at the total value, and for some reason we've been doing what we think is great work, and you've been doing great work, but there's a lot of room here to work on. What things can we do that have huge value in the performance of the reservoir, and how did it perform, and what things did we do? I'm all for. I think it's like if you ever go for marriage counseling, it's the same answer. It's more communication is the answer to all questions. It's what we need. We need actually a lot more communication and more data so that we can understand each other. And so I think there is a ton of work. I mean, it's the same thing I keep saying, but I believe it is in our interest to start working closer together and to look at what we do and how it actually impacts the outcome. And so we're a bit disassociative, and that's not good when it comes to executing our tasks.
Yeah, no, good point, David. That brings me on to the next question. But I just want to mention to the audience, great questions and comments that you guys are making at the moment. So just to pick up a few, there's a debate going on the chat about underbalanced and managed pressure drilling. So Mike van der Stark is saying underbalanced drilling is by definition a reservoir optimization tool. MPD is more productive drilling.
Yep.
Narinda Fascist, sorry, Narinda. Multiple stacked reservoirs could be a problem with underbalanced drilling, where you have different reservoir pressures. So great comments there. So please keep them coming, guys. Really good comments.
I think that's opening up. It's a discussion once again because the MPD UBD community tends to be that. there's room for that to be a cross-discipline conversation. And these conversations go on, but even when I've sat in them over these years, it's usually the same people. So there's room for us to open it up. And there was originally so much resistance. I think MPD really grew out of the resistance for Underbalanced, where people saw the problems and understood the problems. But I think the challenge is worth it.
Yeah.
I think we've not really gained the benefits yet of connecting the value that it can produce to the risk that everyone, rightfully so, worries about the risk, worries about what damage it can do. But I think the funny thing is, Underbalanced is a lot more of a new subject than we would like to say.
Yeah, no, I think it's certainly a very strong remark there about the future of the discipline. Very, very conservative industry. We want to be safe, as you say, but that's probably the future. And I'm going to use that point to sort of tilt us slightly towards talking a little bit about the SPE disciplines and technical sections within SPE. Erdal, I'm going to kick off with you and a question we got from Priyank on earlier on LinkedIn. So he's talking about, this goes back to your comments earlier, Erdal, about reservoir modeling. And sort of having to join the little dots that we have from the reservoir into something comprehensive. So Priyank was asking about moving to open source customizable tools rather than using these conventional older reservoir models. What are your thoughts around that? How is SPE technical sections within your discipline beginning to address some of these conundrums? And also, I just want to throw in there, you were talking about conventionalizing unconventionals. I mean, there's a very big difference in the scale of the reservoir from an unconventional perspective versus a conventional. And there's also different physics involved as well, right? So give us what's the lay of the road for your discipline?
I really appreciate this question. It's an excellent one. And I think at this age, with the cloud computing and all these things, open source software tools and everything, I think we are going to see more utility from them. But let me give you a specific example. Particularly in the beginning of unconventional development, when I was teaching some unconventional reservoir courses, I would just point out that the tools we had for the reservoir engineering, for example, in unconventionals, they were designed for conventional resources. So most of them would actually be even deceiving in terms of the results we get from them, because they made certain assumptions to be efficient, so on and so forth, and these assumptions would not work for unconventionals. Now, the next question comes up. Am I the only smart person on the planet to figure this out? Why didn't people fix those? Didn't they know? Well, they did. But that's a resource issue. So development of a tool, especially large reservoir simulation software and things like this, they require investment of huge resources. And this brings us back to the question of drilling wells and knowing the reservoir through drilling and everything. So there was not much interest in reservoir software. So software development requires resources. Somebody has to pay for it. And if no one is paying for it, then it doesn't matter whether you know the problem or not. It's a huge investment, and the software developers will have to charge it to someone. So that brings us to this issue. We all know that the open source concept, it's a very good tool, but at the same time, we have to face the reality. Somebody has to pay for this tool unless we have a mechanism to figure out who is going to make this investment and who is going to pay it, and also in a timely manner. That's probably the big question behind the actual comment, and I think it's an important one.
Oh, no, excellent. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, Erdal. But David, back to you. If you want to pick up on some of Erdal's comments, but also maybe talk a little bit about your discipline and particularly some of the economic drivers within drilling engineering, how we continue to drive down the costs so that we remain and can be more efficient.
It was a very, very similar subject, actually, because what Erdal is dealing with is a real challenge. There are companies who have invested and there's companies who need investment. Yet what we're learning from best practices outside of our industry is that speed is everything. Exponential growth isn't natural to us. And so we tend to be more measured and careful. And so, but just like SpaceX has disrupted NASA, we're looking for that and need that, and we need to find a path towards that kind of disruption. And that means the economics need to work in our favor. Generally, I think everybody was getting told by legal counsel mostly to protect your data at all costs. And Erdal's right, because you've invested in it. If you're a software company, that's everything to you. But there are other models that allow collaboration. And that's really where we have to learn to be more agile. A lot of people in our space are working on standards of communication, for example, across all of the data sets and all the different systems. Originally, I know inside of our DSATs group, we kind of said, here's a recommendation that the groups come up with. We tested it, and then we put that out, and then people didn't follow it. People went whichever way they went, just trying to get themselves some advantage. But ultimately, I think what's happening now is the emergence of this understanding that connectivity and communication between data sets is critical. And it doesn't necessarily mean standardization. That's quite an old thought when people are trying to get everyone into the same language or the same process. In fact, most of the references they use come from, telephone communications and things that have passed, because what happens today is there's a lot more advancement in the ability for systems to recognize multi-language and do translation. So it's a great example where we were a bit behind the curve trying to do what we did before, trying to manage everyone's concerns when really there's ways to go faster. So I think breaking up tasks, I've been talking with some large service companies about the same thing. We're doing this, you're doing this, these people are doing this. We don't need everyone to do the same thing and repeat and cause all of us to have options. What we need is to decide where your space is and decide where your space is not, and actually break up the work so that we can collaborate a lot more. So I think that kind of learning, we're on the edge of, like, these are conversations that are going on in the last months, more than we've been talking about this for a while, but everyone's coming to the same conclusion that learning how to collaborate, to be more agile, and to connect systems and communicate and work data sets. You need competition, but at the same time, you need to understand where people can play and compete in a more open way. And it's a new language for us. It's a new paradigm, and but I think we're approaching it now. I think it really is for us with our technical sections. We found it pretty quickly because as they went to the digital subject, each of them started stepping on each other's toes, and we actually had to take our three groups and talk about, okay, who's doing what in this group, and we've been discussing it at a higher level, saying, okay, across all of the disciplines, because you talk about AI and drilling, that's a great subject, but there's AI in everything. We're all working in that somewhere. How do those systems connect, as well as how are they learning? What things are we doing in the parts of the society that can help each other? And so there's really a lot of good talk about moving that faster. The speed that we normally move, especially in the digital sphere, is probably too slow if we want to get where we can get, particularly in this downturn. So I think the pressure is causing good conversation and pushing us through to really work into these issues.
Thanks, David. And I think hopefully that answers some of what Adonis Ichim on LinkedIn was asking: how can drilling work together with reservoir engineering better? I think you've touched on some really good points there, David. Also picking up some comments from Mark Anderson on YouTube about, again, having reservoir engineers on the drilling team when you're doing underbalanced drilling in the reservoir helps significantly in that collaboration piece. Turning back to you, Erdal, you were talking about somebody has to make the investment in the software for the software to advance. I just want to ask about, so with unconventionals, we have generally very low recovery factors, around 10%, 11%. There's a lot of oil still left in the ground. It's a rock maybe we don't understand very well because of our old models and understanding of flowing porous media. You know, surely there is a big argument there to, if somebody makes the investment in the software, then there's a lot more oil we can get out of the ground. What's the barrier around that, do you see, within the reservoir engineering discipline?
I think I should say that in the fast pace of development of unconventional resources, we created this illusion that unconventionals are quite prolific based on this early few years of high production with very high decline. But it was pretty much based on, I would use this term, but we would just suck the juice and spit the rest. So most of the time, we would just look at this early high production period in these reservoirs. And by the time we come down to this kind of plateau, we would hope that somebody would give us some more money to drill the next well. So everybody would kind of forget about this low recovery factors. And the more interesting fact is that we talk about the EURs and everything else, but nobody is really producing these wells to their EUR. Nobody was really interested in. So that was kind of the big issue we had with these wells. I mean, in terms of the economics, if you make the economics based on EURs, the reality was that we were only producing these wells for the first 2-3 years to show Wall Street that you can make a lot of money. This is the promise. But for me to fulfill this promise, I need to drill the next well. So at that point, hopefully they forget about the previous one. It went down by 80% decline and reached that stabilization period. And then the recovery, by the time we leave them, people talk about 10% recovery, but the actual end of the life of the well is usually 1 to 5% recovery at the most. Now, the biggest problem with this one, we started drilling too many wells, and the unconventionals started creating a huge footprint on the surface, which brings us to the center stage again, and we become the target. And these days, the best thing to do is to go low profile in our industry, because when people see us less, they will complain about us less, because it's a fashionable thing to be green, but forget about some of the realities. So we have to act accordingly. We should make sure that we create less surface disturbance, which is by creating improving our recovery factors. So that's the direction to go in unconventionals. Unfortunately, we went in the wrong direction, which came back and hit us on both finances, on both public perceptions, on both the real project economics, so on and so forth.
It's good, Erdal. I think there's something that this doesn't get out much, because I've heard it in public, people saying, "Oh, it's cheaper to do unconventional work," which is not true at all. It's capital intensive. It costs a lot, and when you actually look at returns and cost of returns, offshore work is extremely economical, as well as more prolific on land applications that are more conventional. So it's interesting, because I've heard it like it's fact lately, because we're become so Wall Street focused on delivery of returns, which when you can get your money back in 80 days, you're talking Wall Street language, as opposed to the normal multi-year approach that we have to getting more resources at less cost. Even though the total capital looks like more, it is actually cheaper to go and do offshore work. So it's an interesting challenge. But as we have reserve is down eventually here, it's going to be interesting to see what the right answer is and where the right money goes. But you also bring in another subject, and I don't know if it's coming up in the chat, but our image in the industry and what we can do about it. I think that's another trend that I don't know how it affects Reservoir, but certainly hearing your angle was probably the first time I've heard, that does have an impact because Reservoir is driving what we're doing. And do you think, Erdal, that unconventional caused you to have less teeth in the Reservoir department? Do you think that's a reality? Because I've certainly seen when we think we can bring benefit to Reservoir, it doesn't get the same attention to the performance of drilling question.
I think that's true because what we saw in unconventional area, when we start doing our reservoir work, it's a time-consuming process. I mean, in drilling, you have optimized it. You want to drill the well in 1 or 2 weeks, and then another week to fracture it, and then next week it's on production. So that's efficiency. But in reservoir engineering, we need to collect the data, we need to find the tools, we need to create the models and then fine-tune it and everything. So this is usually a multi-year task before you can actually put out a product. And by that time, you're drilling your 5th well. Okay? So who cares about reservoir under these conditions? That was kind of the mentality. But if you become focused more in long-term recoveries, then things start getting to the proper place. You collect the data, and your next well is actually going to improve your model so that you're not going to need the 3rd or the 4th well. Sometimes you can optimize your drainage areas, and if you do not just focus on this early period following the drilling period, the next 2-3 years, probably you can do a little bit better reservoir engineering and science. So that's where we got stuck in the beginning, but this is changing. It has to change because we have reached the limit.
Yeah, Erdal, I think you bring up a very good point there, and to me, it's like we've been here before. You know, just when you were mentioning the footprint of oil and gas in unconventional operations, it brought to mind, you know, the old images of Spindletop and thousands of drilling derricks, you know, scattered across the landscape, and that's a sort of history we don't really want to remind ourselves of, you know. So, and we improved from there, and we went in and developed far more sophisticated conventional reservoirs. And it seems like we've taken a step back as we've discovered unconventionals. And, you know, as you were talking about, there's going to have to be a new revolution as to how we work with these reservoirs in the future. And it's not that distortion around caused by Wall Street. It's more about we have a market to supply, so how do we most efficiently supply that market?
And we also talk about being the custodian of this very valuable energy resource. And we have to leave some of this for the next generations. It really does not make sense to produce 2% and then throw it out. That's not the way to go. If you want this resource to be available for the future generations, because in our industry, we all know that sun or wind or whatever, in the end, they will come into the mix. But somewhere in this mix, there will be hydrocarbons because there is a utility for it. But if we just spend this resource like a spoiled rich person, then I think future generations will ask us, hey, have you thought about me?
Yeah.
Can I ask, Erdal, do you think that in this space we're going to learn a lot more out of the reservoir from the shale applications? Because it did seem that we were just moving ahead as fast as we could in delivering.
Well, I think in the background we have learned a lot. And to give you a specific example, in unconventionals, now we are talking about EOR applications. In fact, to me, it's not really a secondary, tertiary process. It's still, first we produce the fluid in the fracture system, and then we go into the matrix where the real storage is. And trying to reach this oil, which is stuck in this tight portion of the rock, we learned that That's where the remaining oil is, even in conventionals. In conventionals, you produce some, but the remaining oil is stuck in smaller dead-ended pores and a lot of physical complications and everything. And most of the time, your standard enhanced oil recovery practices, which are based on viscosity reduction, which are based on increasing the pressure displacement type of processes and everything, they get to a level and then they stop working. So if you want to go beyond this, I think the knowledge is going to come from these unconventionals where we started looking at molecular level phenomena, and we are trying to come up with some new understanding and technologies which can be taken from this context and applied in conventionals where we can also start improving our recoveries. So I think this is the best outcome from our experience with unconventionals.
Erdal, it's fantastic that you're saying that. And, you know, that conventionals versus unconventionals is going to have to be a whole other SPE live, I think, just having a battleground around that. I just want to turn a slightly our conversation. So two things I want to touch upon. First of all, let's talk a little bit about higher education and the new engineers of the future. But also let's talk about what the future holds for us in terms of drilling and reservoir engineering. But firstly, you know, we talked just now about how market conditions, Wall Street, and the ease of drilling a very large basin-sized reservoir has distorted our disciplines. Erdal, what have been the recent trends in education, university-level education? You know, what are the gaps? What are the challenges for you, do you see, in terms of educating the students?
I guess this is, again, an interesting question. First of all, I will start with quality and quantity issues. And sometimes we say that we should take the best and the brightest and then make them petroleum engineers. This is not really realistic, especially in today's conditions. But we can take the average STEM program graduates, and we can educate them well, and then the industry can train them well, and that will do the job quite a bit. So first, we need to look at this. What happened when the oil price was in $100 and we had this prolific image and everything? We attracted a lot of students into our petroleum engineering departments, and my department at that time had about 1,000 undergrads. It was almost like a whole college by itself. But most of these students were there for the wrong reason. They were there for the money, or they were there for the image of the industry at that time. But when the oil price went down, they were frustrated because we did not live up to our promise to them, as if we told them that this industry would stay like this, because we knew that it had ups and downs. Now, today we get fewer students, but this come into the discipline knowing what they are getting into. And they come from families with some oil and gas background. They come from states with some importance of oil and gas or things like this. So first of all, quality and quantity is another thing. We need students who come to this discipline with the right reason, with the passion of the industry, because these are the ones who will stick around and who will try to improve not only themselves, but the industry, because that's the industry they want to live in. So that's the first thing. Now, the second one, I think this is another interesting topic. As a young student, you come to petroleum engineering, the images you see, they are a little bit what's on the surface. When I was a student in the 1970s, we were shown all these big fleets of fracturing trucks and everything. No, it was the new technology, and it was a huge power, impressive power to crack the earth and things like this. So we were impressed with this. These days, we just show students these offshore platforms and colorful images of rigs and everything. But these are all tangibles on the surface. Now, most of our students come into petroleum engineering seeing this side of the discipline, but getting them into areas like reservoir engineering, flow assurance, things like this, it takes a little bit more than just that one. So I think in the process, if we can connect this initial image of tangibles of the industry into this background work, which is required to come up, then I think we are going to get a little bit better balance of incoming workforce. Otherwise, most of our students think that they are going to go into drilling or fracturing. And then when they start working after a few years, they got transferred into these other areas, which is not bad. I mean, learning all these other areas, but at the same time, if you did not do the due diligence when you were at school to understand the background concepts and everything, or did not pay enough attention, then that would cause a problem. And I'm sure the drilling side would have similar comments or different comments on educational needs. But our education system has to transform itself too, because over the years, we went too much into the training side. I mean, this word about hitting the ground running after school, to me, it's like an insult. I'm sure a lot of people may be surprised by this comment, but the problem is that we don't have time. I mean, in 4-year curriculum with 125 credit hours, we don't have enough time to teach the fundamentals and also train the students where the valve is, how to deal with practicalities and things like this. So we should do our part. We are going to teach them the foundations, fundamentals, general knowledge, and then the training side, I think, unfortunately, it has to stay on the job type of responsibility. So that's where we are struggling these days.
Thanks, Erdal. David, can you pick up on that? Because, what's that from an oil service company perspective? What's that balance between young professionals coming into the industry, understanding the fundamentals versus being ready trained with, the latest tools and gadgets?
Well, interestingly, our drilling, our discipline is generally not all petroleum engineers. So we're a bit different in that our mix is much more broad and diverse. And so we get a lot of hands-on is always required. I think that's just part of the understanding of the complexity of what we do. But I know I didn't plan on, or it was nothing to do with oil and gas in my training, all in the architectural side. And so when I came over, I was wowed by what I didn't know. The large machines, the things that we were doing, the complexity of it. It was up there in with the best technology and the best science that I knew in the world. And that never was something I understood from the outside. So there's something there that we really have to do in our industry, is explain ourselves better, as well as the heart of the industry. It's care and concern for the environment. I mean, it's interesting to watch this transition of people, because we're seeing now the generation coming in is becoming dominant fast, which happens with down cycles. There's a lot more young people or younger people in the mix. And that actually is good for us, because it allows us to get more relevant in what we say and what we do as that happens. So I'm actually enjoying seeing that trend and that change, and the use of data science and digital, and the use of technology, mechanics, chemical engineering. The things that we do in these spaces are very advanced. I think what we have ahead of us is the connection to other industry. We have work to do with being attractive to other industry, because sometimes when we reach out, they're like, oil and gas, not so sure. But everyone who's been here, they're motivated by the fact that they changed the world. I mean, we came in, generationally and said, wow, we're going to actually help the environment get better. We're going to help people live better. Parts of the world are going to open up, and we've seen it happen. I mean, I've traveled the world and seen it change, and known that we're responsible for a lot of that change. is the low cost energy that we've been able to get to everybody. So that's been great, and it's just our next generation. So I think for us, it's understanding that we're not just going to be oil and gas. We're going to emerge into other areas. I believe that the additional energies that we're finding and developing, I believe they will all be successful because of us. I'm watching a great move right now into geothermal, and I think they could use our help, and they're looking, going, maybe we couldn't use your help. Is it a downturn again? You're back. But in reality, they have this. We look at what they're doing and go, there's some value, some things that we've learned by focusing intently and repeating our work that we actually can bring in some intense value into their equations. And I think that's going to be the same across the board. That there are things we're going to do as oil and gas companies emerging as the biggest energy provider, helping almost the new kids in and saying, okay, there's some business things you can learn, there's some technology things you can apply, and there's some focus you can get into. So I think that's ahead of us. And but doing that, be vocal about that. I'm not apologizing for what we've done, because we've done great for the world, and we're going to continue to do great for the world. But doing it where we're like, okay, now we really need to manage our efficiencies. We really need to manage our energy use. We need to make sure we do continue to leave this planet better than we found it. And so we've got work to do there. But I believe that is us, and that awareness and communicating that. Generally, we're engineers. We're not great communicators because we think it's obvious. And we need to communicate that in simple terms that people can understand. But this is a brilliant industry with smart people who care a lot. And most people don't know that, and so we've got our work cut out for us ahead. But I'm excited about it, who we are and what we can be in drilling and all of our disciplines. I think it's a good future that we have.
Thanks, David. Really, just to sort of wrap up a little bit. So looking ahead for both disciplines, reservoir and drilling, what are, sort of just briefly, what do you see are the sort of technology gaps that we need to fill to continue to advance our industry, address the sustainability concerns around us, but also continue to meet the global demand for energy? What are the gaps? Erdal, let's begin with you.
I think being a little bit more on the theoretical side of things, I will call it not the technology gaps, but mostly, I would say, understanding gaps. And this is not to say that we did not understand what we are dealing with, but we made a lot of assumptions about our reservoirs. And this is engineering. That's what distinguishes us from fundamental sciences, practical science and engineering. I think we have to simplify what we are dealing with for the efficiency of our operations. So our understanding of our disciplines and the tools, technologies we created to deal with, they included some assumptions. And these assumptions were tested and approved based on our experience with more conventional prolific reservoirs in the 1960s and even earlier, most of them, unfortunately. And once they are in the system, it's very hard to take them out. So most of our obstacles today in terms of creating new groundbreaking type of technologies are based on these old perceptions or assumptions we created from the early days of the industry. So I think we need to take this opportunity about our eye-opening experience with unconventionals and say that, hey, we need to take a fresh look. And as a specific example, all of us think about oil these days like the fluid filling up a container. That's the bulk fluid. But when you put this one into a pore space, which is a small fraction of the thickness of your hair, then it's no longer the bulk fluid, it's the molecules inside this fluid. But our PVT relations, our fluid flow concepts and everything, these are all about bulk fluids, for example. So we need to bring this back, look at it from a more fundamental perspective, but then you cannot deal with these huge reservoirs like a doctor or some of the molecular scientists at this molecular or pore scale level, because our business requires dealing with the reservoir at this huge mile scale rather than nanoscale. So we need to go back to understand, but then we have to find this transitioning to practicality. And to me, that's where the biggest problem is, because there are a lot of tools, there are a lot of books we can import from other sciences and engineering to understand the foundations. But what's really missing is the upscaling, because the past upscaling practices were based on the continuum assumption. We could assume that we can make volumetric averages and blow it up and things like this. Now, these are not working at this small scale. So I think making the connection between this much more smaller context and taking it to the field level, this connection is the biggest gap at the moment.
Thank you, Erdal. That's a real call to arms there, actually, to any young professional, is going back to fundamentals, thinking about practical science and engineering and how it scales within our reservoir environments. Very, very powerful message. So, we need engineers that are that capable in this industry to make it work efficiently in the future. Get rid of all these old models from the 60s and 70s that we hold so dearly. David, from your perspective, what in the future, what are the gaps around drilling engineering?
I think really for us, it's in probably three areas: communication, learning not just to communicate amongst ourselves and amongst our groups, which we've seen as a challenge, but outside of our disciplines and even outside of our industry. So communication is going to be critical for us, and then collaborating in that space, learning to develop the muscles to actually be more open and work with others. I think that's going to be critical. And then caring actually about the various parts, how they interact with each other, caring about even our teams and the diversity of our teams, how we interact with the world. I think those three things probably, even though they're not your typical discipline statement, but I think they matter a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Again, very powerful message about that communication, collaboration, and thinking about our sustainability within the world itself and the important role that we continue to play. Gentlemen, we have to wrap it up. We're out of time. Fantastic conversation. We just keep going all day talking with the pair of you. So, we've covered a lot. We've had great audience engagement, a lot of good questions and comments coming in all the time. So thank you very much, audience. Erdal, David, thank you again for a fascinating conversation about our present industry and where we need to go and the challenges for our young professionals and students coming into the industry. So thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Thanks. Great.
Thank you. Thanks for the
Have
opportunity.
a great day. Thank you to our SPE Foundation for sponsoring us, and thank you for Asha for producing our show today. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, audience. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye.
See ya.